So that was Joshua Allen and Tommy Costello. And Tommy, we appreciate you being here. Just to let you know, Joshua was a member of Unity of Richmond on Seminary Avenue. So he's been around. He was a performer there, sang from time to time. So Joshua, you bless us. All right. So today is all about harvesting our gratitude. And we know we've come through Thanksgiving. So hopefully you've got some of those warm thoughts and feelings flowing through you. I'll tell you, Richard and I went over to my brothers and my sister-in-laws, and there were about 12 adults and 8 children. And what we had was a wonderful time watching these kids on skateboards and playing Legos and eating and not eating and everything else. We were sitting at this long banquet table, and we were popping up, checking on the kids the whole time. And it was such a wonderful, warm time. And I do hope we can experience that together as church family on Christmas Day, when we'll all have our Christmas banquet together. So plan on that. Bring children and grandchildren. So we're going to harvest our gratitude. And I opened my emails this morning, and Mark Hicks had a message. He writes for Truth Unity. Actually, he is Truth Unity. He is the author. But he loves to look at research and bring back our favorite ministers who have, in past years, provided such wisdom. And so we want to think about this Advent season and move forward in gratitude for it. Here's what Mark has said, that this is the first Sunday of Advent, a time in which we light the candle of faith in our spiritual communities and in our hearts. So if we miss that, we have missed what we're journeying into up until Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. So he calls upon what Eric Butterworth, a very pronounced, wonderful, now deceased Unity minister, but here's what Eric said about faith. God is centered in you. God is centered in you always. The question is, what is your consciousness centered in? If your thought is centered in materiality, if it's centered in difficulties, if it's centered in the news of the day, it's centered in the idea, oh my, everything happens to me. And this is going to frustrate your whole flow. Remember, God is centered in you. The kingdom of all potentiality is already within you. Positive faith is the key to the kingdom. You don't need to become something different in order to release your imprisoned splendor. Your need is simply to get your consciousness centered in God, centered in the realization that the whole universe believes in you. The whole universe is flowing into you and through you. Your need is to accept it, to let it happen, and to let yourself be directed out of that consciousness of faith-believing attitude. Well, what does that mean? What does it look like and feel like to know that God is centered in me? And perhaps the better question, more important for us, what kind of church provides an environment where each of us can know and celebrate that the whole universe believes in me? Now, when we talk about harvesting our gratitude, we want to really, really consider what is happening. Are we aware that fully that divine essence is us? It's God centered in us? And are we creating that in this spiritual environment? Because it takes all of us to focus together to make things happen. And we are ministry focused, not minister focused. We're ministry focused. And so getting ourselves really focused on what does it mean to be God-centered in this ministry. Now, one of the things that I have found that supported my meditation has been to find those places of emptiness and solitude, those quiet places, sometimes in nature, sometimes in retreat centers, but definitely a quiet place of solitude that's uninterrupted. And it's similar to go as our early Christian fathers used to go out into the Egyptian desert to connect with that presence. That is the whole idea of you and I going into quiet, going into the silence, and finding that deeper, grateful, more loving connection that is eternal. And we tap into it, knowing it's flowing through us. It is permanent, and it is true, and we can trust it. So it's all about doing a little bit of soul making this morning. There's a book that Alan Jones wrote called Soul Making. And it helps us remember that you and I can choose. We can choose the way of this, the world, materiality, worry, or stress. And we can choose this, which is more spirit-led, following more a quiet direction from within, and knowing that all our needs are met. So in this faith, I want to share with you a reading from the Daily Word. And it says this, that the good in our lives expands proportionately as we look for and give thanks for our blessings. So what does that mean for us? It means that as we bless, we have more good flowing into our lives. So it's bless me and bless you and bless us. It can't be anything other, because when we want to bring the good in, we've got to stay in the place of thankfulness, appreciation, gratitude. Now, if we say that we are in a distrustful place and we distrust what's going on, then that is what we're creating. So our job is to be in a place of faith, because that's where we feel the blessing and the good. So those of you who are shaking your head already know that's what you're doing in your spiritual lives. Good for you. When we see and have faith in one another, there's a divine harmony that goes on, isn't it? And we see that others can step forward and do great and wonderful things. And our goal is to see the good in them, see the good in our lives, and ourselves, and in our lives. Now, there's a minister whose name is Reverend Kelly Isola. And she works generally out of Unity Village, writing some articles for Unity Magazine. And one she wrote about this month was on finding the great fullness of life. And no others great words, the fullness of life. Because we don't want the half, do we? We want to feel that overflow of abundance, prosperity, and goodness flowing through our lives. But here's what we need to do in order for that to happen. In all things, give thanks. Now, that doesn't mean then that we give thanks for this and not that which is pleasant and that which we like. No, we give thanks for all things, that which is uncomfortable, that which we don't particularly like. We might even hate it. But when we give thanks for it, what happens? We're restored again, back into this place of oneness, where the goodness begins to come to us, the lessons begin to come to us, the wisdom and the understanding for us. So our job is to be connected to that greater good. So good in the broader sense, God the good, omnipotence. So to do this, we need to see life differently, and that means loving it all. Loving it all. loving that flat tire, loving that huge credit card bill, loving that relationship that just split apart from you, loving that time of life where you feel like you are robust and energetic. You are loving it all. So when we don't get to choose, it's all there on the banquet table for us. That's the fullness of it. And you and I can then say, I am holy, I am whole. Because I do accept that. I do understand that about life. Now, when we get to that place, we need to have some type of inner work going on. Perhaps feel that transcendent feeling of oneness, that mystical union with Spirit. How many of you have ever felt that? You don't have to raise your hand, but if you have felt it, you know what I'm talking about. Well, I recently went on a retreat in North Carolina, and it was for spiritual direction. And a group of us attended a lecture one night, and then afterwards we were going to walk the labyrinth. So it was my assumption that the labyrinth was going to be in quiet. We would be meditating and walking within the lines and then go back to our rooms. But that's not necessarily what happened with this group. They wanted to dance to the song Hallelujah, which we did. And then we got to the circle in the middle of the labyrinth, and we made a circle with our heads and put our legs outstretched and just laid back and looked at the stars. Several people began to sing, others shared poetry that they knew, and before I knew it, I was lost in that place of oneness. And it was for just a split second, it felt like, but truly a place of peace. Not a worry, not a thought in the world. And as I began thinking of it, you know, when you and I are in that place of all there is, that is the kingdom that Jesus talked about. That's where we find that place of wisdom and comfort and find that indwelling presence within. Now, those of you who are familiar with the writings of Eugene O'Neill might not know that he had a transcendent experience. And it was all about sailing on a stargazing, actually, on a sailboat. And this is what he says. For a moment, I lost myself. I dissolved in the sea, became white sails, flying spray, became moonlight, and the ship and the high dimmed sky. And I belonged without past or future in peace, unity, and a wild joy. Because something within was greater than my own life. It was life itself. And so it's in that place of transcendency that you and I can dissolve and feel that wild joy, that sense of pure life, no separation, knowing I am nothing and I am everything at the same time. And that's a very humbled feeling, but if you have journeyed into this conscious awareness of the Christ, it goes beyond Jesus. It goes into a cosmic Christ that is within everyone, that is huge in scope and in magnitude and in magnificence. This Christmas, we want to walk toward that place. We want to connect with it. And we also want to be aware of the ripple effect of it. Now, if you take a pebble and you drop it into water, it sinks to the bottom, but it creates these lovely little concentric waves going out. Well, our faith and our gratitude is sort of like that. When we just drop something into water in our consciousness and then start stepping forward, we create the ripple effect of goodness. So let me give you this little story about a Hindu boy. There was a boy who wanted a drum, but his mother did not have a drum, and couldn't afford one, so sadly she just gave him a stick to play with. And he began to play with the stick and went on down the road. And then he encountered an old woman and a wood stove, and it wouldn't light without any lighter. And so he gave her the stick. Well, she then bakes some bread and gives him half. So he goes on down the road, and he comes upon a potter's wife whose child was dying from hunger. And so the boy gives her the bread. And in gratitude, the potter's wife gives the boy a pot. Now, the boy didn't need a pot, but he took it and he carried it along with him to the river, where he saw a couple who were arguing because the wife had dropped their pot and it had broken, and they could no longer wash their clothes. And so the boy gave them the pot, and in gratitude, they gave him a coat. Now, the boy did not need a coat, but he took the coat and went on down the road, and soon he met a man on a bridge that had been robbed and had no clothes and was shivering. And so he gave the man a coat, and the man was so grateful, the man gives the boy a horse. Well, the boy didn't ride a horse, but he took the horse and he went on down the road, and he met a wedding party with musicians. And the wedding party looked very sad because the bridegroom had no horse in which to ride into the wedding party. And so the boy gave him the horse. And so the bridegroom was so grateful, he said, "What can I give you?" And so the boy said, and looking over at the musicians, he said, "The drum." And so the boy got the drum after all. And so it's in this thread, as we see this thread of giving and receiving and giving and receiving, and the goodness that comes out of both, we can see this is the fullness of life, isn't it? This is how we operate and walk in faith together and unfold our goodness. And if it's cut short, we don't really experience the totality of it. We need to be able to stay with something until it comes full circle to bless us. So many of you here in this community, I have witnessed giving, and truly giving from your heart. That might mean prayer support. It might mean volunteering in some way. I've also seen you receiving when it was time to receive, and listen to others and be supported by others, or get a little help from now and then with an article. You know, a phone call, a prayer goes a long way. And so it's in this giving and receiving that we do here. I see the blessings that occur. I know God is centered in you when that occurs. So what we want to remember, that life is an artful journey. We're living our in the soul-making part of our lives. It's all about moving in an art-filled way from our heart space, so that all that we do is creative. The creative process is the foundation of unity. It's not about forgetting our humanness. It's about the co-journeying with our humanness with our divine selves. Together in relationship, we find the way. This is our art, and we can make sense of our lives, can't we, from that perspective? Our vision is to transform the world, but first we transform ourselves, don't we? It's that healing process that we just say is so important. So the great fullness of life, discovering a field of treasures, the good, bad, and the ugly, knowing it's all good. The Japanese call it wabi-sabi, and they have 3 realities: that nothing lasts, nothing is finished, and nothing is perfect. And so it is in this wisdom that we can find gratitude, can't we? We can relax, and we can learn to say, "Thank you, God, for every experience." Let's say that together. Thank you, God, for every experience. Yeah, when we say those words, we are now connected. We are moving beyond fear-based thinking. When we're not fear-based, we're never letting these thoughts of how am I going to pay for this and how am I going to do that and am I good enough? We'll just move into a place of asking and receiving. We won't be clutching one another to love me, love me, love me, knowing it's ours to love others. It's a giving process. We're not running away from pain. We're not running or avoiding any discomfort. We're sitting and talking with people. It helps us so much just to be present with one another. And we're not forgetting to say, wow, isn't this world just crazy beautiful? And isn't it just crazy sometimes? And when we're there, we know that we are filled up with gratitude because it is sometimes overwhelming. What we want to be in the here and now is a universal presence of love in that place of the heart, in that place of the manger. If we think about moving into noticing every little thing, the small things that people do for us, we can really see how those little things lift us up. They energize. They do support us. They do transform us. So years ago, Richard and I went out to Arizona and we drove over to the Hopi Mesas, to Old Arabi. And we heard in this tribal land, one of the elders speaking. And now I have another wisdom, another verse of wisdom that I want to share with you. But all of our cultures that connect with spirit have such wisdom. Here, listen to these words. You have been telling the people this is the 11th hour. Now you must go back and tell the people this is the hour. And there are things to be considered. Where are you living? What are you doing? What are your relationships? Are you in right relation? It is time to speak your truth. Create your community, be good to one another, and do not look outside yourself for the leader. And then the elder clasped his hands together and said, this could be a good time. So I'm saying that to you. In our world, in our lives, in our spiritual community, this can be a good time. When you and I remember that the good in our lives expands proportionately as we look for and give thanks for all our blessings. We can harvest it all. We can remember that whoever sows sparingly also reaps sparingly, and those who sow bountifully will reap bountifully. So this season, staying in this heartfelt place of gratitude, stay in the place of soul making, we can have that place of peace and contentment, the overflow of joy and love in our lives. It's moving in faith. It's accepting our conditions of life, the wabi-sabi. Nothing lasts, nothing is finished, nothing is permanent. And as we hold to this cosmic love, we know that we are coming into this understanding that God is centered in you and me right here, right now. And we can experience a great harvest. Thank you and blessings.